Hey, my name is Bill Ferriter, and it's time for another 10-minute team tip. So I had a friend ask me recently, hey Bill, could you make a video describing the difference between a rubric and a proficiency scale? And then could you talk about why a proficiency scale is a valuable tool for a collaborative team? I figured that was a good topic, so we'll go ahead and give it a whirl. Now, when I try to explain the difference between a proficiency scale and a rubric, I oftentimes turn to the thinking of my friend Tom Schimmer, who's a fantastic assessment expert that pushes my mind. And if you were to ask Tom to describe the difference between a rubric and a proficiency scale, he would use a pancake metaphor. Tom says that a rubric, generally speaking, is used to grade one individual product that was produced by a student. So it might be an essay that students made. It might be a video that students created. It might be a role play that students engaged in. And on that individual rubric, the different levels of performance almost always start with the completion of a product. So if we were talking about a rubric for a pancake, for the ability to make a pancake, level 1 on the rubric, the lowest level of performance, would still be that you made a successful pancake. It might be a disgusting pancake. You might not actually want to eat it. It could be burnt and gnarled, but you made a pancake. That's level 1 on a rubric. Level 4 on a rubric for successfully making a pancake is the most wonderful stack of pancakes you've ever seen in your life. You didn't just make one pancake, you made multiple pancakes, and they were all perfect and golden brown. And you didn't even stop at just making a pancake. Even though that's what the rubric asked you to do, you were told the project was make a pancake. You made 4, and you successfully dressed them. So maybe you put butter on top, and you've got maple syrup dripping down the sides, and you've added some blueberries or fruit. Do you see how that works? So a rubric is usually used to grade a product, and the levels on the rubric almost always start with, well, you created something. It may not be perfect, it may not be wonderful, it may not reflect mastery, but you made a product that you were asked to make. So in this case, a terrible pancake, but still a pancake. Now, on a proficiency scale, things are a little bit different. A proficiency scale generally describes a continuum of progress towards mastery. So it details from the beginning the individual steps that you have to take in order to move forward and be able to create whatever it is that you're being asked to create to reach grade level mastery. So that term, a continuum of learning, is worth thinking about. What that means is that on a proficiency scale, level 1 for making a pancake, in Tom's analogy, would be you successfully gathered the materials, right? You've got to begin by finding your eggs and finding your butter and finding your flour. That's step 1. Step 2 might be you've got to mix those ingredients together in the right order. Step 3 might be you've got to get those ingredients on the stove in a pan and cook them at the right length of time in order to produce your pancake. And step 4 is then you can take it further. You can work beyond mastery by dressing your pancakes or making multiple pancakes. Do you see the difference there? Level 1 on a rubric for a pancake is you successfully made a pancake even if it's something that nobody wants to eat. Level 1 on a proficiency scale is you got to gather the materials. The difference is we're trying to describe on a proficiency scale the steps that someone takes in order to move forward towards mastery. Think of it as a continuum of learning. Now, don't get me wrong, I believe that there's a place for both rubrics and proficiency scales in our work. If you as a team are trying to assess a product, an individual assignment that students have turned in, rubric is a great choice for you to use. A proficiency scale, though, helps you to see the steps students are taking towards mastery. You as a team begin to articulate and describe exactly what a student would have to do in order to move learning forward. And that has value too, but value in a slightly different way. Now, if you want to see what a proficiency scale might look like, I've added a sample down in the session description. It's a proficiency scale for making a layup. I wrote this with a group of PE teachers in Louisiana. So pause the video if you need to and go and open up that proficiency scale so that you can explore it. I'll give you a second to do that. All right, now that you've got it open, take a look at it and tell me what you like about the format of the scale. First, do you notice that it is describing a continuum of learning? What step do you take first? What step do you take second? What step do you take third? Second, what do you notice about the indicators in the far right column? Is there anything there that you think is useful? Do you think there's a decision I made there that will help me, either as a teacher or my students? And last but not least, what do you think of the indicator column in the very center? How does that make you feel? All right, go ahead and pause the video and do some exploring there. So here are the things that I wanted you to notice. I really like in my evidence of mastery column, I really like that we set it up as checkboxes. Do you see that? They're also very explicit. So each individual bullet point is something that's clearly described. The reason that's so important is because now teachers and students can use the proficiency scale consistently. There's no room for interpretation about how do you move forward. There's direct steps that you can take to move forward. I think that's important. That makes the tool more valuable. If those descriptors were not as explicit, people would interpret the next step differently. And I think that becomes an issue. I also like that it is a checklist. And that's because students and teachers can use that checklist feature in order to evaluate where they currently are and then figure out what a next step worth taking is. I think turning it into a checklist makes it a more valuable tool to use in the moment while assessing. Now, I also really like this column that has the indicators, the points earned column. You could use that to score a student if you wanted to. But I also thought it might be neat if you're creating a proficiency scale for an academic skill, you might change that to indicate the performance or expectations of performance at different grade levels. So think about creating an essay. You know, if you had a student that you wanted to be able to create an essay and you're teaching 8th grade, you might want to also have the 7th grade expectations and the 9th grade expectations detailed. Or think about solving a linear equation. That's a concept that's introduced, I think, in 8th grade, and it moves on to 9th grade mathematics. So you could change that column to represent different grade levels if you wanted to, as long as you had a skill or a concept or a product that also spanned grade levels. Why would that be useful? Well, because then you've got some consistency vertically in your expectations for students too. Now, I'll give you a tip or two for creating your proficiency scales. By the way, down at the bottom, there's also a blank template for you. This is how I walk people through creating proficiency scales. So open that up if you want to, check it out. At the top of the doc, you'll see that there are 3 direct boxes that's drawn from the work of Bob Marzano. He says, describe the learning that is essential. What should you see every student do? Start there. It's going to be level 3 on your proficiency scale. And then together describe the work that is simpler than your grade level expectations and more complex than your grade level expectations. Why? Because as you have that conversation, that's going to show you what level 4 will look like on your proficiency scale and level 2s and 3s. Second tip I have for you is something I mentioned before. You really need to make sure that in your evidence column, in that progression, you have to have explicit rather than vague statements. If you have vague statements in that column, nobody can apply your proficiency scale consistently. So the more explicit you can be about describing what proficiency looks like at each level, the more useful your proficiency scale will be. Now, I want you to think for a second, how would having a proficiency scale in place help a team to more effectively plan intervention and extension work for students? Because that's where I see real value in a proficiency scale. Go ahead and pause the video and think about that for a second. Well, here's my answer to that question. One of the mistakes that I think we make when we plan interventions and plan extensions is that we don't have clarity around the different levels of performance that a student should take. And as a result, it's difficult for us to provide targeted interventions or extensions. So we might reteach, but we're not reteaching in a focused and intentional way that's designed to move an individual student from where they are to where they need to be. If you have a proficiency scale, it's easy to first identify exactly where a student is and see an individual step that student can take. And more importantly, plan an instructional action, your next instructional step to move that student forward. The other reason that I like proficiency scales from an intervention and an extension standpoint is if you're explicit enough and you teach your students about proficiency scales, you empower them to be your partners in the learning process. I like to ask teachers all the time, is this job hard? And their answer is yes. One of the reasons why teaching is so darn hard is because we're doing all the work. If we create proficiency scales that are written in language students can understand, they can identify next steps that they can take to either intervene on their own behalf or extend on their own behalf. So yeah, creating a proficiency scale is some initial work for teachers, but in the end, if you use it as a tool to empower your learners, then you get partners in all of this work, which might make things easier. All right, hope that 10-minute team tip was worthwhile. Be sure you hit the like and subscribe button down low so you don't miss the next one. Thanks a ton for coming.